I've got Suzanne Vernon, PhD, Cindy Bateman, MD, and Desiree Thomason, who lives in the Alpine or Highland area and is a patient of Dr. Bateman's, and an individual who has had this illness since you were 15, I think. So Suzanne, let's start with you. Just briefly, what is it you do at the Bateman Horne Center and your connection to this illness?
Hi everyone, I'm Suzanne Vernon. I've been the Research Director at the Bateman Horne Center for the past 3 years now. I got into studying, I'm a scientist, infectious disease scientist. I got into studying CFS at the Centers for Disease Control Prevention in the mid-1990s. So I've been looking for biomarkers, trying to identify ways to objectively diagnose the disease and try to figure out how to treat it, targeted treatment, for the past almost 20 years now.
I may just also quickly ask, can everybody hear okay the way we're projecting here? Will that work? And Davey, you indicated you're going to record.
Yes.
And we'll make that link available through the Utah Film Center website, I believe. Dr. Bateman.
I'm Cindy Bateman. I'm from Provo. Grew up here, went to school here, went to medical school at Johns Hopkins, and came back to the University of Utah for internal medicine residency. And when I came back, my sister was afflicted by this illness, and she was healthy when I left and sick when I got back. So right at the beginning of my medical career, I was faced with a really important challenge, and that was really great because, not great that she had it, but really great that it was someone I knew, because then there was no question about what was going on with this illness. So from the very beginning of my medical career, I started being interested in attending conferences and trying to make a difference. And after I'd practiced internal medicine for about 10 years, I opened a clinic just for evaluation and management of people with chronic fatigue and fibromyalgia. And then one thing led to another, and in the last few years I snagged her when she got loose one time. And we were able to,
snagged her.
and we've known each other for a long time in the field, and I decided that it would really, the way to really make progress would be to form a nonprofit clinic and research center. So that's what we've been doing the last few years.
Desiree.
Okay, I'm Desiree, and I got sick when I was 15. It was suddenly and viral-like, and I missed a bunch of school because I just sleep for like 20 plus hours a day, and I didn't get a diagnosis for about 5 years when I met Dr. Bateman and went to her clinic. And before that, the doctors thought I was depressed and suggested antidepressants, and I was depressed. I was depressed that I was tired and had all these horrible symptoms and couldn't live a full life. So at this point, I've been ill longer than I was ever healthy. I'm 32 now, so I've had this for a while, and it can affect young people, old people, middle-aged people. So yeah, we need a cure.
I'm impressed the way individuals I've met have to manage this illness. And when we talked earlier today, there was a period of time that you knew you were tired and you knew that you had to prepare for coming out tonight. What is your day like? How do you sort of map out what you can and can't do?
They talked about it in the film, like finding your, like, what did they call it?
Energy envelope?
Yes, energy envelope, but they called it something with an A in the film. Like they were finding, when she was on the bicycle, they talked about it.
Oh,
like,
the anaerobic threshold.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, you have to find like how much you can do, and that has taken me years. I sleep a lot. I do best if I can sleep at least 12 hours at night, and sometimes I don't sleep very well because I have symptoms that keep me up, like pain and just stiffness and other things. So sleep is really important, and then watching how much I'm on my feet, because being on my feet really affects my tiredness levels and,
Sure.
and cognitive things too. So you constantly have to like watch your physical output and your mental output.
So I want to open it up to the audience. Before we do, I just want to ask you, Dr. Bateman, we witnessed with Jen and her friends in the film a real range, but some very, very ill people over a period of time. Could you discuss just a little bit about what the spectrum of this illness, how it manifests itself?
Sure. It is there's a pretty broad spectrum. I think some people are able to achieve some stability so that they're able to maybe work at certain types of jobs. Well, you know, I would say that people who work with this illness do it at a great cost, and the people who are able to maintain full-time work do it with a lot of accommodations and help, and you know, maybe giving up a lot of other things in their life that they're unable to do. And then it ranges all the way. I think the bulk of people are kind of half-time people. And I think of the day in 3 segments, like morning, afternoon, and evening. And most healthy people are 3-segment people. You could do morning, afternoon, and evening. And then the mildly affected people are like 2-segment people. And then the medium people are 1-segment people. They can get in 2 to 4 hours of activity in a day, and then otherwise have to be pretty careful. But there are people who become so ill that they are bedridden, and sometimes it becomes so severe, it's like Whitney in the film. And I would think that's the exception, but it's important to remember, and I think this was the point of the film, when we don't identify the illness, validate the illness, people just disappear. And Whitney's cared for in his home there were long periods of time. He was too sick to go to doctor's appointments and things. It's just, even in my own clinic, I wonder sometimes, because I don't have many people in my clinic that are that severely ill. Most people can make it to the clinic for a visit. Sometimes I do the equivalent of Skype visits. But then I realized that the severely ill people can't get to my clinic. And there's even a selection bias for the clinic of experts of the most severely ill people being very, very lost and marginalized. And I have one patient who, she lives in Wisconsin. She's probably around 40, and her husband left her, and he left her the house and health insurance, but she can barely leave the house, and she doesn't have relatives, and you know, the most she can do is walk around in her house periodically, and sometimes go outside and sit outside for a short time. And she's scared and isolated and frightened, you know, about what's going to happen to her. So the most important thing with this illness is to identify it and, you know, help people, assist them to adapt to it, and that's what we're trying to do with Bateman Horne Center, is that not only push out this information to doctors and the public, but also use as many tools as we can to advance the research. And there are a lot of really exciting things going on. And you know, it's a small community. We do research with Ron Davis, the Stanford physician, and we're on the phone today with Nancy Klimas, the woman in Florida, talking about some of the projects we're going to work on together. So we're small groups, but we're making progress. And I would say that the federal government has awarded a grant of $30 million over 5 years to be shared by 3 collaborative centers in the United States, and to do research and to try to understand this. And we're really happy at Bateman Horne Center to be part of like the main clinical core of one of those grants, and a clinic that's participating on the one at Columbia. So we're really hopeful. Yep. And our patients are so awesome. They come volunteer for research all the time and give their blood and suffer. And what other questions have we got?
Any thoughts, any questions from the audience? Yes, right back here.
One thing that somewhat bothered me in the film is how they brought up the whole, she brought up the whole point of children, having children. And yes, I think she didn't have children mainly because she was afraid that her child, son or daughter, would have it, so why did they take adoption as an option?
Well, I would say that it's more complicated than that. Because, and I have a lot of patients who choose to have children in their relationship, but they have to do it with a lot of support and help. So, so it's, while there's the issue of giving birth, which is, you know, a difficult process, and the potential risk of transmission, which actually isn't proven. But it's not easy to adopt a child either. That's a huge amount of work. It's actually caring for your children that is so taxing and difficult. So, you know, I really encourage each person in my clinic to, you know, just examine what their life goals are, what they care about the most, because you can't do everything with this illness. You got to pare down to a smaller, we're so task-oriented, right, in our culture, and we kind of value life by how much we do and how many we do. But it's really about the quality you find in your life. So people take it on, but they've got to take it on realistically.
You had a question over here? Did I see a hand about to go up? Yes.
So I'm curious where the state of the art. I mean, my wife has suffered with this for years, and we've gone to several doctors together. And you know, A, difficult to diagnose, and then B, you know, what can you actually do about it? I guess the question I have is, first, you know, are there any diagnostics that actually clearly indicate that someone is suffering from it? And then B, are there any things that you've found that actually help it to get better?
So actually it's easy to diagnose because nothing else is like this, right? That it diminishes energy capacity severely in both cognitive and physical, and also sometimes the ability to just be upright. And the more you push through those boundaries, the more, you know, that you have the potential of quite severe relapse and setback of symptoms. And that's a very clear diagnostic sign of this disease.
So it's easy to diagnose, but not many people diagnose it.
Right, and so, but physicians haven't been trained about how to recognize the disease, so they're not confident making a disease. And it's hard to look at someone, if you tried to communicate that in the film, there's a whole different paradigm about how to judge this kind of a thing, because people don't look like they don't look sick until they're in relapse. So a lot of times when they're pacing and they're in a little better place or they're rested up, they just look normal. In fact, lots of people can make themselves do anything. In the moment, it's what's gonna happen to them after they do it. That's the problem. So we doctors are really trained to ask those questions. And so there are tests, there actually science right now that shows the low, sort of the things they talked about in the film, but it's not available like in a clinical lab to go get it to prove the disease. But my contention is you don't need that. This illness presents in a very consistent way. So, and what's the other thing that people don't appreciate is you have to enable people to control their activity. And what do we do in our society? We browbeat people and we're judgmental about people who don't maintain a certain amount of activity or productivity. And if we could understand this illness, we would do everything possible to enable people to enjoy the time that they're feeling good and just live their life. But those are the upstream problems, or the things that we're fighting against. So it's really about awareness and compassion. And even Jen, I think, you know, how many times did she just say, it's worth it, I'm gonna expend the energy anyway, and then be really, really sick afterwards. But I think what I try to teach patients is don't extend too far into that place. And the more you can control your energy envelope and not go into that above, you know, beyond that anaerobic threshold, actually can do quite a bit and be pretty happy and live your life. But it's sometimes very lonely, right, if people don't understand.
You said, when I first saw you, you said something that made so much sense to me. It's like most people have $1 of energy to spend, and you only have a dime. So you have to be really smart with how you spend that dime. And that has really helped me, and it helps my family and friends understand it too. And when you want to do those fun events, you have to like plan for how you're going to spend it throughout the day or week. Or
it's hard to give up things, right? But it's also important to spend that dime and enjoy that dime, right? And spend that dime doing the things that are the most meaningful, not waste it. You know, like, for example, I'll tell people, if you're gonna go on a trip, take a wheelchair through the airport. Why would you walk through the airport and carry your bags, and by the time you get on the plane, you can't enjoy your trip? But it's kind of embarrassing and demoralizing to energy save like that. So those are just attitude changes that we need to make that would really help people.
So Desiree, talk a little bit about your support network and how you are able to manage. You talked about how important it is to enable that support.
I have my family here tonight. They're supporting me. I think like them like living with me and seeing me how I was before has helped them. Like she would never make this up, but I know like my youngest brother, he was really little when I got sick, like a baby, and he's had a harder time kind of adjusting, like, oh, you used to be this person that had like goals and energy and, you know, was ambitious, and just we're slowly educating him and explaining to him. I think films like this help a lot, and getting the word out, and you need like a support system too. Through the Bateman Horne Center, they do what's called Lunch and Learn, where a group of us get together each month, those of us who are feeling well enough, and we meet and support each other, and that's been really good for me and my husband, so he can see that there's other people out there who are caretakers who are struggling too, because the caretakers, like, they need support too, so.
I wanted to bring that up too. I mean, the beautiful thing about this film was the many dimensions of the film. And you could have compassion for her, but you could really have compassion for Omar, right? And then for each other in their marriage about how hard that was. And there's no easy solution but to, you know, find ways to make it work and have a lot of patience and love, and it's like
A
there are
couple
a lot
more
of
questions
things.
right here, and
Yeah,
sorry.
Well, so have you ever seen any patients actually get better from this, like reverse the disease and be able to live a normal life?
Yeah, I mean, especially I think in the early phases of illness. I can say that I never feel hard and fast about telling people, you know, you're never gonna get better or you will get better. Because I've seen people be sick and get better and maybe stay better. I've seen people have episodes of illness in their life until they finally have one that is severe. And I've seen people you have very severe onset and just stay in that place. I mean, so I've seen everything. I have patients who have been pretty good, and then they go down, and then they come back up, and then they go back down. So it's really, like everything, it's a combination of how severe the illness is that's beyond your control. Maybe some things that are gonna happen to you that you can't control, but there's a big element of, you know, kind of planning your own health and doing as many things as you can to keep the things that are within your control as healthy as possible. And that puts you in a better place to heal as well as you can heal.
I want to go to Dr. Vernon here in a second, talk a little bit about some of the research, but let's take your question first.
Oh, well, you anticipated me. It struck the same thought about husbands and the support. Since 85% are women, a lot of the support givers are men or husbands or partners. So how do we support those who support us? You know, how do we help the husbands or the males, the support givers?
Right, and I think there in the literature there's a little bit of a skew toward women. I know there are many. I don't think it's 80%. I think it's more like 2/3, 1/3 women to men. And I feel really bad when I hate to say this because I love everybody, but it's harder for the men who get this disease. It's hard for everybody, but if the men get it, there's much less patience for them appearing weak and not being able to provide for their families. And I have one guy who, when he got sick, his wife, she was a homemaker, had to go out and do entry-level jobs and work 2 or 3 jobs to support their family while they raised their kids because he was at home. And that was hard, really, really hard for her. Yeah,
So Dr. Vernon, talk to us a little bit about what you've seen in the world of research here and some of the things we're working on at the Bateman Horne Center that we find to be interesting and hoping to move the science forward on this.
So when I left CDC and I moved into the nonprofit world, I met with some patients, and I said, you know, what did I told them about all this really cool, exciting research that I had been doing with, you know, artificial intelligence and data mining and genomics and billions of data points and all that kind of stuff, and they kind of looked at me and glossed over, and then I said, isn't that cool? And they were like, well, yeah, but what about treatments? And that just stuck with me. And so I think there's some really cool research going on in many areas of MECFS. But what is the most exciting to me are some of the treatment trials. To some degree have been driven by the research that has been done over the past 30 years and by some people who are kind of thinking outside the envelope a little bit. So I'm most excited about treatment and trials and thinking about how we can repurpose various drugs, how we can just really push those types of things. Because at the Bateman Horne Center, we are a clinical research center, and that is really super unique and important. You know, Ron Davis is an incredible scientist, National Academy of Scientists scientist. But he's at Stanford in a molecular biology that's somewhat detached from the whole clinical aspects of it. Super important biomarker stuff. But again, where we're at and what we're doing, which is focusing on treatment, is really important and rare. And I think it's going to be essential for moving the needle on where we are with MECFS. And once we do that, it's going to have a ripple effect. I'm sure of it. And one of the things that I think what Cindy is doing that is so important, well, the Bateman Horne Center is doing, and that our grant from the NIH is helping us do, is educating doctors. Mm-hmm. We have a handful of docs who have dedicated their life to this in this country. That's unacceptable. What we have to do is we have to get people diagnosed. We have to be able to manage people that are sick in order to help them get better. And early diagnosis, we know this with almost any chronic disease, early diagnosis gives you a better chance of recovery from the disease. So the more people we can teach to be able to diagnose and manage MECFS, the sooner we will be able to mainstream this disease so that you don't run into this credibility issue or this legitimacy issue, and we have more attention paid to it by the government, by the pharmaceutical industry, in order to be able to get the pharmaceutical trials that we need.
It's a dilemma because we need to understand the underpinnings of the illness in order to design targeted and appropriate treatments. And so one of the frustrations is in understandable desperation to get treatments and to get better, sometimes there's a lot of trial and error, and that's okay as long as it isn't dangerous and it doesn't
Trial and error by the patients?
Yeah, well, with their doctors, but
yeah.
I mean, and, you know, you'll hear lots of things out there, you know, cures and treatments and everything, but I can tell you that for the bulk of people with this illness, that's just not the answer. There are many, many reasons people become fatigued, and that's not the same as this illness.
Right.
So, you know, when you're talking to people out there who have great stories about how their fatigue improved, you know, if I analyzed their case, I could probably come up with some explanations. And I'm glad they're better if they do certain treatments. But there's a temptation to want to judge people who don't get better. And that's, I would hesitate, you know, to ever go down that path.
I think in so many ways we're stuck in this catch-22. The NIH, I was up on the Hill for many years, and I would go to Congress and, you know, did testifying and went to the NIH, and the NIH would say, well, you need biomarkers, and then once you get biomarkers, then we'll give you more money. And it's like, well, wait a minute, how can we find biomarkers if we don't have any money? And then the FDA, 5 years ago, says, well, you have to go back to the beginning. What does back to the beginning mean? You have to go back and define the core signs, symptoms, and decrements and specific functioning of this disease in order to be able to get into this pipeline of treatment. And this was in 2013, I think I saw this presentation by the FDA in the audience. And I just sat there, I mean, my mouth just dropped open. Because it's, I don't know, I say this to Cindy all the time, it feels like we're on a hamster wheel, you know, and we keep reinventing the wheel, and so much of it is, you know, not necessarily the fault of the scientists or the medical community, but there's many problems. We don't have enough money, we don't have enough people, we don't have enough ways to kind of aggregate all this information that we've all this knowledge that we've kind of worked at over the past couple of years. But anyway, so hopefully by now concentrating a lot of our effort and expertise at the Bateman Horne Center, and then we'll have this ripple effect. I'm confident, I do think we are at a tipping point where we can make a difference in diagnosis and in treatment.
I wanted to say, add a little bit to that, is what's unique about what we're doing, and I think why it's going to be successful, is we took a very large practice, my medical practice, full of patients, hundreds of patients who have this illness, and realized we could leverage that gold mine. And even though I'm not, you know, the expert immunologist or the person studying the genome, this woman right here is one of the best connectors there is. And when we teamed up, what Suzanne has done is reached out into the scientific community and said, look, we have this great problem, you know, this is something you can work on, and we can hand you the samples of 100 patients if we partner up. And the scientists are interested. So we've been able to partner in the last few years with numerous scientists, even as far as Japan and Canada, but many in the United States, and it's cool because you know, we're able to make more quick progress. We call the patients, and they come marching in and donate their blood and other things, other orifices sampling, and then Suzanne has the gift of yeah.
Oh, I know which one you're talking about.
Yeah, TMI.
So Suzanne has the gift of really networking and drawing in these scientists. So that's what our goal is in bringing the center together, is to really facilitate more rapid growth of that. But I want to just leave you with the most important advice as patients. It's really the job of physicians and scientists to move this forward, and we're doing our very best to get over that hump of the barriers. But what you need to do, if you're the patient, is you need to take care of yourself. You know, you need to be healthy and adapt to your illness and live your life. And, you know, be open to ideas. But I think sometimes people who are constantly searching treatment after treatment after treatment, you know, time goes by and their life has left them behind without having a chance to just be. So it's really important to surround yourself by loving people and people who understand, a small group of people who understand you, and carve out your little niche as a human. Do you agree with that?
I totally agree, yeah. Find a new way to do things and to look at life.
Just maybe time for another question or two. Are we good? Yes, sir.
Can it be concurrent with other fatigue type diseases, or is it kind of mutually exclusive, kind of like a trash can diagnosis?
That's a good question. We don't really, if we understood the total underpinnings of the illness, we could be able to tell you that. But as in the way we've studied the illness for several decades, it's been a diagnosis of exclusion. So, you know, if you have anything else that, you know, could be contributing to the fatigue, you don't get that diagnosis. But that was a research case definition. That really was not ever intended to be the diagnosis that a doctor uses in the clinic, because of course anybody can get more than one thing. So it's really a different question in research than in the clinic. And so when someone comes into the clinic with me, I'm not as worried about niching them into a single diagnosis as I am about identifying all the factors that might be contributing to their symptoms and working on as many as possible that are reversible or that you can moderate.
One of the things that's so striking to me is the doctors that I've known over the course of my career say that they know CFS the moment it walks through their door, which is mind-boggling to me, that more doctors aren't diagnosing it, aren't comfortable diagnosing it. Maybe that's because there are no treatments, right? And
no, it's just that they're not taught about this illness, and the way we talk to patients, to take a history and do a physical exam, unfortunately, all of those things miss the mark for this illness. And doctors just have to learn how to ask the questions in a different way and ask the right questions, and they just haven't been taught to do it. I was on a panel with a kind of famous rheumatologist who, and she was telling her experience of understanding the new clinical criteria that were just published in 2015. These are new diagnostic criteria that have been put out for clinicians, and she said all of a sudden the light went on in her head, and she knew every patient she'd ever seen who probably had this diagnosis that she'd missed, and that was those two key factors, and that is that there's impairment in normal function and post-exertional relapse or post-exertional malaise, and that separates it from almost all the other types of illness, unless you know there's an obvious cause, right, of it. But this is very unique, and we just need to have a lot more doctors who understand how to diagnose it and basically manage it, and then we need to move the science forward so that we can have intelligent progress in treatments.
I think it's clear conversion disorder is a misdiagnosis for this, and that ME/CFS is maybe under-recognized and a mistreated diagnosis. I'm wondering what's your opinion on conversion disorder. Do you think it's even a real disorder? Or is it just like a favorite thing for neurologists to jump on?
I don't think I've ever made that diagnosis in a patient, but I'm not a psychiatrist. But in all of my primary care practice, I do have patients who've been diagnosed with that. I don't think they have it. You know, patients that I feel have ME/CFS. What's really horrible and insidious about ME/CFS is some patients with this illness have significant involvement in their brain, and they also have a problem with maintaining normal blood flow, and that's one of the reasons people can't stand up long enough. And when you don't perfuse your brain, and particularly if your brain, and like she described, if the brain cells are low on ATP and energy capacity, any neurologic symptom or psychological symptom could happen. And people can have what are called pseudo seizures. I've seen people, did you see that in the film? And the girl got so tired when she lay down in the bed, it was like she was having a seizure, but it wasn't a true seizure. And I've seen people develop that kind of jerking when they go too far over that anaerobic threshold. And they also, it's like a person who's hypoglycemic. They kind of become confused and can't make decisions properly. So there are lots of, it's too simple to just push it over into a psychiatric diagnosis. And I have really interested, I have 2 psychiatrists working in my office now, part-time. This is brand new, they're women, and they're toward the end of their career, and they're really interested in crossing these barriers and whole patient management. And they can see right away in the clinic that the patients don't. I mean, they can see the difference between the mental health and the physical health.
All right. One more question here.
I had several that I was...
Go ahead.
Well, I was interested to know the age range that it normally strikes. Does it strike later in life? There was a comment in one of your answers that implied that, but it seemed like a number of the people in the film that were interviewed contracted it when they were young.
So remember, the film is for the movie effect, right? And it's who she related to. Unfortunately, we lack really good studies and epidemiologic data. Imagine if, I think the data suggests that as many as 80% of people never get a diagnosis. So then it's hard to make those assessments. But from what we know, it's the average age of onset is around 33, between 30 and 40. But there are kind of two times that are common. One is in adolescence, and then adolescence into the 20s, and then one sort of in early middle age. But it's really difficult in younger children because they can't communicate to you very well. And when they're not functioning, it's really hard to know what's going on with them. But there are data that suggest that this illness is the most common cause of prolonged school absence in children, because kids don't really get illnesses that keep them out of school. And they also disappear. If they can't toe the line and do what they need to do in school, they just end up, being at home or whatever. And then we tend not to diagnose these things in people that are older because there are so many other things that are starting to take a toll on people's ability to function.
Is there are there any drugs that have been developed that help in the treatment of it, or is it mainly just sort of your own personal management of it and identifying what your limits are and
I would say that that's
something?
those most, the pacing or, understanding how to manage your activity level is number 1, 2, and 3. So that is key. And that really, don't you think that once you start to understand that, you're more free because you have better control over things, even though you can't do everything. But there are lots of medicines we can use for some of the symptoms, helping people with sleep and helping with pain and
Blood pressure.
Yep, and then the people that get this really bad problem with their circulatory system, there are things we can do to help support that so they can be upright longer, and that's an important insight for patients. And I think most of the things we do, well, it seems like it's a Band-Aid. The better you control those things, the better people do. And I really think that not advising people about this illness leads them to patterns that can really worsen their illness because they don't realize that what they're doing can make them worse. And I think it might determine the more severe prognoses for people that they spent several years trying to function and forcing themselves to go do things until they were just unable to recover.
You mentioned in one of the answers that early diagnosis can oftentimes help cure the disease.
We don't really know, but I think that there's a better chance of recovery, and I think there's a better chance of milder chronic illness with early intervention. But that's the study we're doing now. That's the money we got from the NIH. We proposed that we would enroll patients who'd been sick less than 3 years and study the immunology and the metabolomics and all the things that they're doing at Jackson Labs. What I've discovered is I don't know that much about people with early onset because I never get to see them. By the time people get to my clinic, they've been sick for 5 years. So we've started to see these patients. It's fascinating for me now with all of this experience to go back. And I'm seeing lots of red flags and things that probably could have been done in that first 3 years if we had just had awareness.
Diagnosed it earlier.
Or had the tools to look at, maybe what those things were that were going on that led up to the more severe parts of illness. So, yeah, we have a lot to do to understand it better.
And I just had one other question, and that is there a concentration in different parts of the world that seem like the people that she aligned herself with were all over the world? Do you see it more prevalent in first world countries or second or third
It's
world
hard
countries?
to compare, but all the studies so far, it really is pretty much everywhere. And that actually one study in the U.S. showed it was more common in lower socioeconomic groups and minority areas as opposed to kind of entitled, white, educated people, which is sometimes a stereotype that people have.
Yeah, there was a study in Georgia, and they compared metropolitan Atlanta to rural Georgia, and the rate was actually higher in rural areas and in men.
So it's a little bit of access to healthcare and interfacing with doctors who have any clue about what the disease is and how to diagnose it.
Types of exposures. I think the one kind of, my favorite hypothesis for what causes ME/CFS is that we all have some genetic vulnerability to any kind of disease. So there's this genetic vulnerability to developing ME/CFS, and over the course of your life, you have a series of events that occur. Does anybody know that game that it's a camel that's on wheels and it has these little saddlebags and you put straws in and then too many straws and then all of a sudden the camel's back breaks? Well, so you get mononucleosis when you're 16, you get strep when you're 21, you get these series of events that happens, and then there's one event, if you are a genetically vulnerable individual, that then puts you into a state of ME/CFS. So that's one of the prevailing hypotheses.
We want to thank all of you for taking the time to come tonight. Let's give our panelists a hand here. And thanks to the Utah Film Center for your sponsorship and commitment to producing these kinds of programs for education, other purposes. You do a series of things. Very, very worthwhile to follow them. We encourage you to follow the Bateman Horne Center. Our mission should be clear, if not specifically stated. We're about educating. And our contribution to the world is going to be to help mainstream this illness through educating providers as well as providing educational support for patients, whether they can come and be physically present or whether they can view these videos we're producing in bed if necessary. It's important to learn the mechanics of what's going on and to help improve their lives. I'm going to ask each of you for a quick 10-second, your wish for this illness going forward at Bateman Horne Center. Suzanne, let's start with you. 10 words or less. These are sound bites to take home.
Treatment trials or treatments approved within the next 3 years.
Diagnostic tests within the next 3 years.
The last word.
What they said, and then getting more support from the community and your family and doctors.
Nice.
Awesome.
Nice.
Thank you very much.